Hi there, welcome in. I'm often asked what it takes to turn out the LED lighted vehicles that I show in my YouTube videos. Those questions often make it clear somebody out there is thinking, I could do that. What's the big deal? Well, I've made this video to show the many steps that are needed to transform something like this. It's a 1/50th scale tractor trailer made by Matchbox back in 1998. I found this one on eBay, and we're going to install a total of 23 LEDs. Before you do anything else, round up some closable containers for the bolts and other small parts that have to come off. Otherwise, and this is from personal experience, you're going to lose some of them by the time you're ready to put the thing back together. Time to attack the cab. Now here, you must carefully cut the exhaust stack from the cab at the point circled. I used an X-Acto knife. You'll end up gluing this stack back on in final assembly. Remove the two bolts holding the cab to the chassis. Use a small Phillips screwdriver. Separate the chassis, put it in some safe place, but not so safe that you'll forget where it is. Separate the cab portion from the fenders. The radiator also has to be removed. Radiator is plastic, so go easy on it, and the tiny bulldog ornament that's a topping. The dummy headlight inserts come out next. They are plastic, so it's no big deal to get them off if you work from the back side. Drill the opening to 3/32 of an inch. Now I plan to completely replace the dummy turn signals on the front fenders, so I drilled those openings out to 1/16 of an inch. Part of doing one of these projects is finding a place to hide the wiring, and that's why I drilled a 1/8 inch hole through the inside fender wall into what will be open space under the hood when I put it all back together. Time to start the lighting. Thread an Evan Designs Pico Red DC and Pico Orange DC LED through that 1/8 inch hole from under the hood space to beneath the fender, and then through the 1/16 inch hole you made in the fender where the fake turn signals used to be. Important to lightly coat the back of one of these LEDs with bonding. This is a liquid resin that can be set hard and clear in seconds with the included UV light. This step will insulate the LED. A link to Bondic, by the way, can be found in the description of this video. Next, you'll use Bondic to fasten the second of the LEDs to the insulated one, making sure the light emitting sides face out and are directly opposite each other. A further careful layer by layer application of Bondic is used to make the tiny lenses. At this point, and often while you're working, be sure you test the LEDs. It's a lot easier while they're not fastened down to replace any that you may have accidentally damaged. Pull the wires through the hole in the fender so that the paired LEDs are flush with the outside. Make sure the orange side faces forward, the red face backward, and then use Bondic on the underside of the fender to fasten the whole affair in place. Just like that, you've created a working turn signal. Now repeat the process on the other fender. I hope you're beginning to see that it takes time and patience to end up with a top quality job. There aren't any shortcuts. But if an old guy like me could teach himself how to do it, I bet you could too. It does help to take frequent breaks. I usually don't go more than 90 minutes before I wander off and do something else for a while. But if you stick with it, and with me for the rest of this video, and it does take less than 90 minutes for the video, I promise you're going to like what happens. Okay, back at it. Since the headlight buckets are covered with black paint, I've decided to paint them silver. Once that paint is dried, pass an Evan Designs Nano Warm Light DC through the 1/8 inch hole in the fender wall and then through the 3/32 hole in the headlight bucket. Now you're going to want to carefully bend the head of the LED to a 90-degree angle. Make sure you don't break either of the wire connections to it in doing this. And then you'll lightly coat that LED with some Bondic to insulate it from the metal where you're going to install it. Now the LED gets pulled into place in the center of the 1/32 hole, and you fasten it there with Bondic. You will also want to put some Bondic on the back side where the LED is installed for the headlight. Make sure you cover the entire opening. Now, using several light applications of Bondic, you can slowly build up a lens for the headlight, and then test the LED to make sure you haven't messed it up. Now repeat the last 5 steps for the other headlight. And with the LEDs now installed, it's time to hide all the excess wire and connect the leads together. I found that coiling the wires around a toothpick helps to conserve space. At all times, you have to remember not to route the wires in any area where they could get pinched or crushed when you put the truck back together, because if that happens, it could cause a short circuit and the LED's not going to work. Okay, now the wires have to be consolidated into just 2 leads. Do this by twisting all the reds together and all the greens together. This is yet another point at which you want to test your connections to be sure all the LEDs are working. Again, it's a lot easier to replace any non-working ones at this point as opposed to once the cab is all put back together. The fender piece with the headlights and turn signals installed will eventually be wired into the other LEDs we're going to stuff into the cab. But there's one more step to assure a realistic looking final product. Make sure the areas indicated by the arrows are completely covered and sealed with bonding, and then coat them with flat black paint to prevent light from leaking beneath the fenders of the finished truck. Just know that if you do not completely seal those places first with bonding, there's a good chance the black paint's going to leak into the headlight cavity and you're going to wind up having to put in a new LED. Now it's time to set the fender piece aside and tackle the cab portion. Turn it upside down, remove the 2 rivets holding the seats in place. I use the Dremel tool for this. You can also drill them out, although that takes a lot more time. Next, I broke down the cab to its main parts. I've circled a tiny plastic insert inside the roof, that is, the center 3 dummy cab top clearance lights. That comes out. The antenna and fake hoses were removed from the back of the cab, as are the 2 side mirrors. This keeps you from breaking them during handling. They can all be glued back in place later. Using a small hobby drill, a hole was made in the back of the cab beneath the rear window. Notice that I cut a notch in the back of the seat piece. This is so it won't interfere with the wiring that will exit through the tiny hole in the rear of the cab and connect to the trailer later. Remove the 2 outer plastic dummy cab top clearance lights. Drill those openings out with a 1/16 inch drill. Time to install 5 Evan Designs Pico Orange DC LEDs in the cab top clearance lights. Be sure to first coat them lightly with bonding to insulate them from any metal, and also be sure you place them with the light emitting side facing up toward the top of the cab. Cover the backs of those 5 LEDs with a strip of black electrician's tape. That'll prevent their light from leaking into the completed cab. Using thin layers of Bondic, build up lenses in the cab top openings for the clearance lights. If you stray outside the lines while doing this, wipe it off before you hit it with UV light and try again. Time to glue the clear plastic front and rear windows in place. This is the glue I use, and a link to where to get it is in the description of the video. I use a mini 2-wire connector available from Evan Designs to hook the cab to the trailer. Pass one end of it through that tiny hole drilled in the back of the cab, then coil part of it around a toothpick to simulate the wiring seen on many real truck cabs. Next, the seats get glued into place. It's also necessary to pack the resistors and extra wire from those clearance top clearance lights into the space beneath the seats. I cut a channel in the plastic to guide the wires toward the front of the cab. Wires from the cab and the fender portions, as well as the leads from the 2 conductor connectors, now get twisted together. Make sure you connect only red to red and then the blacks and greens to each other. After you solder the 2 wires together, be sure to cover them with the right-sized heat shrink tubing. Do not use electrician's tape for any connections in the truck. It can come off with age, and the exposed wires could cause a short, which of course means the LEDs are not going to work. Take care not to break any wires or crimp them between metal parts as you pack the connections beneath the hood area while placing the cab back on the chassis. Now you can bolt it in place. Temporarily hook up the other half of the Mini 2 connector and test to make sure all the LEDs are lighting. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up work on the cab. Next step is to glue the grill back where it belongs. Then those fake hoses and antennas are glued to the proper spots in the back of the cab. You'll also need to reattach the exhaust stack to the proper points. I managed to do this with Bondic, which will later be covered with silver paint to mask the glue job. Paint the cab top clearance light lenses with Tester's Turn Signal Amber Metallic or something similar. All that's left is to glue those spindly mirrors back in place. This is going to take some patience. I managed to get it done using Gorilla Crazy Glue. However you go about it, the cab will be ready after that, and then it's time to move on to the trailer. It is a good idea to cover the top of the trailer with masking tape. That will keep it from getting all hacked up while you're handling it. Take out the 2 bolts holding the rear axle assembly in place. Set the axle and wheels aside in a safe place, along with the bolts. Next, go to the landing gear. Remove the 3 bolts circled here. Put them and the removed piece in some sort of container so you won't lose them. Time to remove these 3 bolts and separate the trailer from the chassis. Always remember to put bolts in a safe place and in such a way that you can remember where that is when it comes time to reuse them. The 6 bolts holding the top of the trailer in place have to come out next. After taking out those 6 bolts, you can remove the rear doors and the floor from the trailer. There are 8 plastic fake clearance lights on the trailer. These get removed by cutting the tabs of each one on the inside of the trailer body and forcing them out. That's going to leave a rectangular opening. We'll fill that in later. Using drills and files, I cut an opening in the center front of the trailer body to tightly fit the other half of the small 2-conductor connector. This has to be firmly glued into place. Remember, the other half of the connector is already wired into the cab. This is when 4 Evan Designs Pico Orange DC LEDs are installed in those rectangular clearance light spots on the front of the trailer. Be sure to insulate them with a light coat of Bondic first, and then use more Bondic to fasten them to the openings and to make lenses. Next, 4 Evan Designs Pico Red DC LEDs are installed in the 4 clearance light rectangles at the rear of the trailer body. The leads from the LEDs and those from that connector in the front of the trailer now have to go together. Remember, twist all the reds into one connection, all the others into the second connection. Notice that I have again coiled excess wire around a toothpick to keep the wiring as neat and consolidated as possible. Using repeated thin layers of Bondic, build up the lenses on each of the 8 rectangular trailer clearance light openings. Once the lens is level with the trailer surface, a final application is made, pulling the applicator straight out from the opening while squeezing out a drop. When the UV light is applied to this, the result is a slightly raised lens for the light. The 4 corners of the metal 4-piece have to be cut away so they do not rub on the installed LEDs and possibly cause a short circuit. IA made this modification with a Dremel tool. You could also probably do it with a cutting file. 2 3/32" holes have to be drilled so wires from the yet-to-be-installed taillights can be routed to those connections made earlier inside the trailer. Hold the chassis in its place against the floor temporarily and drill a matching 9/64" hole through both pieces. This is where the power connector eventually will come through. Make sure you've sealed the back of these LEDs with Bondic and then paint that area flat black. If you fail to seal them, again, the paint can leak into the LED. It will either dim or completely block the light. This piece holds 4 fake plastic taillight lenses. Working from the back side, they have to be removed by cutting off the tabs and then popping them out. Now, using Bondic, install 4 Evan Designs Pico Red LEDs in the 4 holes. Route the wires off to each side, then make lenses for the taillights with Bondic. I chose to glue the floor in place in the trailer, also glue the taillight piece down. While they were not glued originally, I found this made it a whole lot easier to handle once I started putting the trailer back together. Oh, and route the wires from the taillights through those holes you drilled earlier through the trailer body and floor. Properly position the trailer chassis, bolted in place at the 3 points indicated. After that, you reattach the landing gear. Right about now, you'd appreciate my earlier advice to put those tiny bolts someplace where they didn't get lost. You did do that, right? Twist the leads from the taillights into connection with all the others of the trailer, making certain you attach only reds to reds, and then all the others to the other color. Test to be sure everything is still working. Remember, it's a lot less trouble to replace any damaged LED at this point as opposed to after you have the trailer all closed up. Pass wires of a 2-conductor locking connector through the gap in the rear axle piece and then through the 9/64 hole in the bottom of the trailer. A link to where to get that connector, by the way, is in the description of this video. It's important now to tie a loose knot in the wires from the 2-conductor locking connector inside the trailer body. When you tighten this up eventually, the knot prevents pulling the wires out of the trailer and possibly breaking the connections. Slip a 1/8 inch heat shrink tubing over the red wire and strip the end of that wire. Twist the red wire from the 2-conductor connector to the bundled wires from the trailer and solder the connection. Now you'll do the heat shrink tubing and wire stripping deal on the black lead from the 2-conductor connector before twisting it together with the bundled leads from the black and green wires from the LEDs. Solder the connection, slip the heat shrink tubing over both connections, and set it firmly in place. Use the barrel of a soldering iron for this, or if you're careful, a lighter. At this point, you'll pull that restraining knot tight and then pull the connector wires from outside the trailer to position the knot down against the trailer floor. I do put a piece of electrician's tape over it at this point just to kind of hold it in place during reassembly of the trailer. Properly position the roof and the trailer doors, fasten them in place with the 6 long bolts at the points indicated. This can be a little tricky because of the way things go together, so you're going to have to be patient. Also, be sure you don't pinch any of the wires between the edge of the trailer body and the roof. Here you can go ahead and reinstall the rear axle assembly with the 2 bolts you should have remaining at this point. I always put a label on the vehicle specifying the voltage requirements, put it on the bottom of the chassis, so there's no mistake later about how you're supposed to hook the thing up. Now, all that remains is to paint the 4 clearance lights on the front of the trailer with Tester's turn signal amber metallic paint, and the 4 clearance lights as well as the tail lights with Tester's stop light red metallic paint. Now you'll hook that small 2-conductor connector from the tractor to the trailer and then apply power to the main 2-conductor connector coming out the bottom of the trailer. If you got it right, this should be the result. Well, there's no way of getting around it. It does take a lot of time, but the results are worth it. A lot of the techniques that I've shown here could be used in other, less complicated LED lighting of die-cast buildings or whatever. I've put links of the products used in the video description below, as well as one that'll get you a discount from Evan Designs when you buy LEDs. If you have questions, email me. And thanks a lot for watching.